some of you might be interested to start a new palliative care service, either in the community or in the hospital. So it is important for us to know how to do that. So this session will be taken by Mr. Binod Hariharan. So basically, he is an engineering graduate, but he has been in palliative care with Pallium India for a long time. So he's currently working as MD of two companies, but he is a trustee of Pallium India as well. So he will tell you about organizing a palliative care services. So welcome, Binod, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. Thanks, Raju. Can I share my screen?
Sure, sir.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. A good afternoon to all. I guess all are in the almost the same time zone, where it is good afternoon for most of us. Am I right, Raju?
Yes, sir. And good evening too.
Yeah, good evening too. Yes, happy to be here. And thanks once again, Dr. Sunil, for that introduction. So, yeah, as you rightly mentioned, I am not trained as a medical professional. I come with an engineering background. And obviously, the question is then what qualifies me to be talking to you, all of you who are trained as medical professionals, either as doctors. I believe all of you are doctors, right? In this group?
Yes, all are doctors.
Yeah. So as Dr. Sunil mentioned earlier, I've been involved with palliative care as a volunteer for a pretty long time, and that is the only qualification that I can bring to the table. Now, this is a very different topic that we are going to discuss. You might have spent a lot of time talking about diagnosing pain, treating pain and other symptoms, providing end-of-life care, opioids, and a whole lot of medical topics. Now, we are on to a totally different realm, and we're going to talk about organizing palliative care. Now, why is it so important? Why do you think this is relevant for all of you who are trained as medical professionals? Now, there is a specific reason why this has been included, because most often what we find when we conduct courses is that people, doctors, nurses, everyone, they find this very interesting, the concepts of palliative care. And once you're familiar with this topic, and you simply want to do more, you want to explore this option, be more involved in palliative care, either start up something on your own or try to implement palliative care in your own home setting. When I say home setting, I'm talking about the organization that you come from, the institution or wherever. So it could be an NGO, it could be a proper hospital, it could be a different environment for each one of us. Now, therein lies the challenge. Because as professionals, most of us are trained to deliver one specific service, and we are expected to have all the associated, the required, setting to deliver this service. Like for example, if we take the case of a doctor, um, you need a lab. Of course, you are in a hospital most often, and you need someone around you to be a nurse, provide nursing care. You probably would require a social worker for counseling and stuff like that. Um, so if you are going into an operation theater, you expect, a whole lot of attenders to help you out with the surgery, the equipment, and all sorts of things. So, and of course, the management. The In a hospital, you have the management, which is more focused on the administrative aspects and looking at the revenue part of it and implementing new stuff and all that. So, as professionals, we are focused more on delivering the service which is expected out of us. Now, when you come to palliative care, most often we find that you are in a setting, you are in a situation where you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have this proper setting to deliver this care. Like for example, a doctor might find himself in a situation where he doesn't have enough infrastructure to provide the right kind of care. He doesn't have the right kind of the amount of time that he needs to invest in providing this properly, this kind of care properly. So now you need to innovate. So you need to innovate and find out ways and means of providing this care in your own setting. Now that is why we felt it is important for all of us to understand more about the organizational aspects of palliative care as well, rather than just focusing on the service delivery part of it. Of course, this has to do with service delivery, of course. Okay, moving on, what are we going to focus on? So we'll go with the Indian setting, which I'm sure would be more or less the same in most of the developed world. So I believe there are quite a few of you who are coming from the other countries which are not, again, I wouldn't say the wealthy developed world. So I believe most of the challenges what we see in India are going to be the same in other parts of the world, where again we are talking about the developing countries. So we can look at the challenges which we face in India, which again could be considered as the same for the developing countries. And we talk about volunteers, basically the community which is involved. The need for collaboration, to provide this kind of care in a setting in a third world country or a developing country, this is very essential. The need for advocacy, how do you go about doing it? Some basics of fundraising as well. Now, the immediate question is, can we cover all this in an hour and a half? It is challenging. Of course, we cannot cover the entire thing, but then what I hope to achieve with this session is just to give you a brief idea about the challenges that we face and what are the possible approaches that you can take to overcome some of these challenges. Of course, you can, step in and ask questions in between. I'd like to keep it as a more of a interactive session. So please feel free to interrupt and ask questions in the middle. And if there is something which you want to specifically focus on, we could, that we could do that also. So I'm not going to the WHO definition. I have just extracted some of the stuff from within that definition. So it's more like it's a philosophy of care, which I'm sure you must be, sorry. So sorry about that. So it's more philosophy of care. And whom is it applicable to? It is applicable to anyone with life-threatening, or even we prefer to call it life-limiting illness. Right from the point of diagnosis till death and beyond, right? Into bereavement of the family. Well, a tall order, right? Is it really possible to achieve all this? Especially with our the limitations that we find ourselves in, financial limitations, infrastructural limitations, human resource limitations. Again, specifically related to a developing country. Well, it is possible, that has been proven. It's only about, as I said, innovating and trying out new ways of approaching these challenges and trying to overcome them. Okay, so we are trying to provide palliative care in a third world country or a developing country. Now, what does this require? It requires what you call an interdisciplinary approach. You need a whole lot of specialists to be able to provide the kind of care that we're talking about, right? Now, who are the team members? Now, I would request you to think about a few of these team members and let me know who all would constitute a team for providing palliative care, the ideal structure of a team. It's open. Anyone can step in. You could also put it into the chat, whatever comes to your mind. Who all should be there in this interdisciplinary team, which is required to provide palliative care? Okay, physiotherapist. Nilima says doctor, nurse, social worker, psychologist. Dr. Geetika says oncologist, dietitians, physiotherapists, volunteers. Okay. Doctors, nurses, counselor, family members. Very interesting. Steve, Mexico's dentist. I didn't understand what you mean by Mexico's dentists, psychosocial workers, physios, medicos. Okay, you meant medicos. Thanks for the clarification. Caregivers, fantastic. So I think we have covered. And Dr. Subra Raina says finance. Now, very interesting. At least, I'm very happy that all of you have put in your minds and looked at all the possibilities. Yes, I agree. Yeah, community heads. Wow, this is becoming even more interesting. Now, medicos, community heads, caregivers, we're talking about family members, volunteers. Okay, so spiritual people, fantastic. NGOs, society, religious. Okay, we'll move on. I think we don't need to discuss further on this because you already understand what we're talking about here. So yes, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, social workers, therapists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, whatever you can think of, bereavement counselors, of course, volunteers, and the most important set of people, the family, other caregivers, and let's not forget the most crucial member of this team, the patient himself. Because unless the patient is also made part of this team, it's going to be, yes, Dr. Subrahmanyana got it right. The patient also should be included into the team. And that's how we should be working. We should be working together as a complete cohesive team to achieve the best results for the patient and the family. Okay. Thank you everyone for your cooperation. Now, so essentially, what are we talking about? We're talking about anyone who can contribute towards improving the quality of life. The focus here is on quality of life, right? Quality of life of the patient and the family. Now, I'm not going to debate more on this because you all are clear about this now. It's everyone's business. It's not just the medical professionals who should be involved. We are talking about anyone in the community who is willing to step in and give a helping hand. So in India, now coming back to this, and thank you for clarifying this part, because unless we are clear about this, someone like me, I don't have a role to play here. So I am here talking to you only because this involves me as a part of this community, as a volunteer, as a caregiver. I also belong to the society which you want to be involved in providing palliative care. So thank you for letting me in. So in India, the palliative care programs, as most of you would know, it could be classified into three major categories. One is, of course, the standalone, which means you have an independent setup which is exclusively focused on symptom management and pain relief and typical palliative care. Or it could be within a hospital, a part of a hospital, one specialty. That's also something which we see in India and elsewhere, the rest of the world. And community-based. When I say community-based, here the community is also involved. It is maintained, managed by the community. And the difference is the community owns the project. It is delivering the service. And the doctors, nurses, the specialists who we are talking about, they're all working under that care program, the community-led care program. Now, and by the way, this is one thing which has been very successfully explored, and it has been a success in at least in one part of India called Kerala, one of the states in India. But of course, this is spreading across the country. There are many other places where, again, this is being tried, and even outside the country. So in India now, we have something called a standard audit tool, which has been developed by the palliative care community. Essentially, it talks about the assessment, documentation, and management of all the symptoms as we know it, pain, psychosocial, spiritual, etc. Then it is about medication, availability of opioids primarily, maintaining it and stuff like that. So these two are essential for us to provide, for us to say that if we have a proper palliative care facility. And of course, you need a team approach where the team is not just picked randomly. You need to have at least one trained doctor and one trained nurse, specially trained in palliative care. and of course engaging the community and healthcare professionals in the operation. Now, when the community is involved, when the team size is big, there should be regular team meetings and it should be a coordinated effort, then only it will be successful. So these are things which we consider as essential for delivery of palliative care, successful palliative care program in India. I'm sure this could be considered the same across other countries as well, especially the developing world. Now, what are the statutory requirements here? Now, this again could vary from one place to the other. It varies from country to country. It could be different between states. What is applicable in our state, Kerala, need not necessarily be what is applicable in another state called Maharashtra. So it could be different. So we need to understand what are the statutory requirements before we set off providing this kind of care. So we need to ensure that the legal statutory the requirements are complied with, essentially laid down by the government. It could be central government, state level, whatever it is. Now, if you are running a separate standalone center, or you're trying to set up one, make sure that the necessary licenses and other medicines there is a facility, proper facility for storing and dispensing your medicines. Of course, you need to have the proper licenses also. And if it is opioid in India, you need to have something called an RMI status, which is, as you know, registered medical institutions, recognized medical institutions. So you need to have that status to be able to, stock and dispense opioids. And if you're running an inpatient facility, again, you need to have the proper licenses, which again would vary from place to place, but then we should be clear, what is required as per the laws of the land, you need to adhere to it. And other things like pollution control, like for example, hospital waste is a major issue, right? So here again, we need to look at those kind of things. If you are having a standalone setup, you need to make sure that licenses from the health department, if required, the waste management, whatever the norms are laid out, that needs to be adhered to. And again, one of the most crucial aspects, earlier when we discussed about the team, someone also mentioned the financial team. So whatever we are trying to do, it involves, to some extent at least, involves money. It involves maintaining, if you need to buy something, you need money. You want to hire someone, you need money. So it's about handling that money in a proper manner. So maintaining proper books of accounts, and obviously if it is a separate entity, you need to have your own bank account. It should not be confused with your personal accounts. It has to be maintained separately. Of course, if you are working under a hospital or some other kind of a setup, all this may not be relevant. Proper books of accounts. You need to file specific reports to the government or other statutory bodies. Those need to be, these are things which are very, very, very important. I can't stress enough the need for maintaining these things, because one small error at one point can actually put a stop to the entire operations. So make sure that you adhere to all the norms which are laid out by the government or the local governing body. And you need to provide your people with the proper training. And if it means specific educational qualifications, like for example, a graduate in nursing, a BSc nurse is essential. If you need that, you need to make sure that the people who hire have the necessary qualifications. A doctor, if it is an MBBS graduate, you need to ensure that that person has that qualification. So we cannot have compromises there. That's what I'm trying to say. But then with all this, with all the doctors, nurses around, even after 30 years, we still have major challenges in terms of coverage. And what we see today is, if you look at India as a whole, as per the experts, what they say is only less than 2% of the people who need palliative care has access to palliative care in India. So it's a very small number, and mind you, this is after 30 years of palliative care being practiced in India. Okay. So we could go on with the factors which influence this. Of course, the population density is a problem, which I'm sure is the same in many parts of Asia, and especially the developing countries. You know, many places you find that similar problems exist. There are restrictive policies. In India, we had to fight for it for almost 25 years to, make the central government change a particular law, which is called the NDPS Act, which is essentially the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. So it could be a challenge sometimes, and these kind of policies need to be changed. And still, while we have changed the policy, implementation is still something which is a challenge. There is always a gap between policy and its implementation. Now, funding, as we know, ultimately you need money sometimes, if not always. And another thing is training. Most of the graduates, even today, who come out of medical colleges in India, they're not properly trained in palliative care. It is just one small paragraph in some book somewhere. It's not an examinable topic, but then things are slowly changing now. There is something called AIDCOM. Most of you should be aware of this. It stands for Attitude, Ethics, and Communication. Now, these are things which have been implemented or integrated into the MBBS curriculum as recently as 2 years back, or I think it was 2019 when it was first integrated. So a lot of things still need to change. And again, in these universities, it's a major challenge as far as training is concerned. Many of the doctors who are supposed to give the training, they themselves are not trained. So, and of course, lack of interest in palliative care, especially with the hospitals, and more so with private hospitals. So now, if you look at healthcare delivery in general, we could normally we classify it into two separate segments. At the macro level and at the micro level. Obviously, at the macro level, we're talking about the government infrastructure, facilities, institutions, medical colleges, hospitals, whatever. And then at the micro level, it is always the family. Now, we often tend to forget this reality. To put things in perspective, if I am I become a patient, I have a fever, who is going to provide care? Obviously, the first level of care is going to come from probably my mother or my daughter or my father. So someone in my family who who's close to me, who is going to provide me with probably the right kind of food, um, you know, supplements, if need be, a paracetamol or whatever it is, or even putting a wet cloth on my forehead. So um, we, while we recognize this, there is this level in between the macro and the micro level. We call it the meso level. Now, this is what makes things very interesting, especially in a developing country. Because as we discussed earlier, one of the major challenges in a developing economy is availability of fund and other resources, um, including infrastructure. Now, how do we overcome that obstacle? How do we overcome that challenge? That is where the community comes into the picture. So, once the community is involved, as was demonstrated in Kerala, for example, lot of these challenges, as we see it, they tend to disappear. Whether it is finance, whether it is resources, human resources, um, medicines, you think about anything, the community has, it's a treasure chest. Most of what you require is there, out there. It's only about reaching out to the community, connecting with the community, and engaging with them. And once we are able to unlock this huge untapped social capital that is lying out there, things become much easier. Most of the problems as we see it today, it starts to disappear. Now, moving on to volunteering. Now, this is one, sorry, one crucial, um, what do you call a game changer, I would say. Um, Especially in a country like India, where you're where you're grappling with all these issues. We also see that most people have a innate, what you call, a sense of belonging to the community. People want to reach out and help people around them. They're willing to help. They're willing to offer what they can. And often this goes unnoticed. We don't really focus on it enough. Now, that is the whole essence of volunteering. Now, if you go by the definition of a volunteer, it says, someone who is willing to take on a task or responsibility without being ordered to do so. I'll just give an example of one gentleman who was a volunteer, who is still a volunteer with our organization. Now, K.N.Nair, he's 63. He's an ex-serviceman, as we call it here. Now, he was an army veteran, retired in 92. In 2002, he lost, his wife was diagnosed with cancer, and she died in November 2004. Now, all this happened very fast. And then in between, from 2002, or rather prior to 2002, at least for a few years, Mr. K.N.Nair was taking his wife from hospital to hospital. He consulted most of the famous oncologists in his area, went to almost all the major hospitals. But unfortunately, none of them could identify the disease. And by the time it was diagnosed in 2002, it was already a bit too late. Now, can you think of yourself in that situation, put yourself in the situation, and can you share what you would be feeling at that point, what your feelings would be, or how you would react to that situation. So assume that your wife, as you are taking your wife to hospitals and oncologists, and then for almost 2 or 3 years, and finally at some point one of the oncologists identifies that it is cancer and says that it is too late, it's in an advanced stage. How would you feel? You're welcome to put in your thoughts in the chat, or you could speak out, use the microphone. Innate desire to help, Nilima, thanks. Savitri says, I would probably be frustrated and angry. Savitri, who would you be angry with? Guilty. Karpagavalli says, guilty. Very interesting. Again, can I ask, why would you feel guilty? Why would you feel guilty when you have taken her to, or this patient to all the hospitals, the specialists? What could you have done more for that person? Why would you feel guilty? I would pray that this does not happen to anyone else, for not being there for his wife. Okay, for not being there for his wife. But he was there with his wife all along. He has taken her to all the professionals, all the hospitals. Maybe with the previous doctors, with fate. Yes, anger. Angry with God. If you're a believer or a God-fearing person. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, all this, it would be definitely a combination of all these things. Yeah, denial. But then I think we should focus on a few things which I mentioned here: frustration, anger, guilt. Now, how would you react in such a situation? You have the guilt. Of course, the guilt could be due to multiple reasons, but one of the things that we normally see happening is, I'm sure you would have also seen it happen at least in sometime in your life. When you go to an oncologist and finally that person identifies this as a third stage cancer, what do you think that oncologist would have told him? What would have been the communication to this gentleman who has taken his wife to this oncologist? What would be the typical, the communication that goes on? Sorry, internet problems. Sorry, yeah. Is it a problem at my end, or?
We can hear you only, sir.
Okay, okay. So would someone like to? Okay. Yes, Dr. Geetika, yes, that she cannot be cured. Nothing more can be done. There is not much left to be done. And what else? Yes, you're right. So actually what happened with Mr. Nair was that, yes, doesn't have much time left. So what actually happened was this gentleman, the doctor, the oncologist, what he told him was, um, why didn't you bring her to me earlier? If only you had brought her to me earlier, we could have solved this problem, or tried to address this. She could have been cured. Now that is something, isn't it? That the way it hits you after running from hospital, going from hospital to hospital, trying to identify the best medical professionals, taking her to all the latest facilities, and in the end, someone tells you, you should have brought her to me earlier, or why didn't you bring her here earlier? We could have saved her. Now, the kind of guilt, yes, it is inflicted upon that person, and this keeps happening. This keeps happening even today. Why does it happen? One of the reasons is that doctors are still not trained um, to manage this kind of situation. They're not uh, given proper training in communication skills, which right now you are undergoing. So it's a very important component which often gets left out when we focus on the disease and cure and all that. We often forget that it's also about the patient, or rather it is about the patient, not the disease. The focus should always be on the well-being of the patient and the family. Yeah. So now all this has happened, and then what do you think he would have done? Or rather, what would you have done? Of course, there is anger, guilt, everything is there. Yes, Nilima, it is very distressing for patient and family to hear that. Yes, it is. Now, if you are in such a situation, how would you react? You have all this pent up feeling, but then how do you react? You are angry with the system, you're frustrated, you're very angry with your doctor, the healthcare system as a whole. So, how would you react? What are the options in front of you? What would you do? And of course, she's already dead by this time. She hung on for another 2 years and she died. So I'm sure most of us would have reacted differently. There are some people, at least among us, who feel that the doctor or the hospital should be you know taken to court. Um, yeah. So there could be situations where you feel that you should go and hit out, or rather grab hold of the doctor and give him a what do you call it? Sometimes it happens, in these hospitals, people get violent, there is a mob, all these things happen. But then for K.N.Nair, it was a different approach which he thought was ideal. So he decided, I will not go after these people, I will not sue them, I will not go after, you know, system failure, unable to diagnose on time, take care of quality of life during the illness, deficits in the system, hence the system needs overhauling. Yes, agreed. So as far as K.N.Nair was concerned, he decided that, whatever I've learned from this, I will use that to try and help others in distress, other people around me. Let me contribute my time and effort to ensure that someone else does not end up in the same situation as I was. Yes, he can make a change. And that's exactly what he did. He started volunteering. He came to us, and then he learned more about palliative care. He started as a volunteer, and within a few years, he actually became a team leader. When I say a team leader, um, actually a team leader is supposed to lead the team, which includes the doctor, the nurses, and the psychologists, and the whole team. Now, essentially, planning your activities, identifying which patients need support, where to go, when, the frequency of visits, who all should be there, all kinds of things. So he actually transformed into a team leader. Now, typically what we see is in a healthcare setting, the doctor by default is considered the leader, need not necessarily be so. A volunteer who is not actually trained in palliative care, or of course, he is trained to some extent in the sense he understands what is palliative care, what the patient needs and all that. But I'm saying, you're not professionally trained as a doctor or a nurse, still, you could still be a leader. Now, and things start to change. Now, what all can a volunteer do? Now, there is no limit to what he or she can do. Depending on his qualifications, their capability, you could get them involved in patient care, social support activities, fundraising, administrative. Now, it's all about being able to identify the capabilities and putting them to good use. So if you are a nurse or trained as a nurse and willing to contribute your time, you could very well be directly involved in patient care as a nurse. If you are not, you could always help out with other support activities. So basically, we believe volunteers, though they are good to have, if they need to be effective, they should be undergoing a proper training program in palliative care, because if they are not properly trained, they could also do a lot of damage rather than helping a patient or family. They could even cause a lot of damage, hurt, unintentionally, cause a lot of hurt to the family or the patient. So we should be very careful there. And it all depends on like I said, the capabilities of the person. We need to identify where that person can fit in, what all areas he can contribute, and also earmark specific days and time. Because when I say volunteer, it also means that you're not earning your livelihood out of this. You have something else to do where you earn your bread and butter, and this is something which you do out of your own free will. So what happens is, unless specific days and time are not dedicated or set apart for this, most often we find that the volunteer can also not be utilized properly. And again, these are things which what we've realized, we need to screen these volunteers, because all volunteers need not come with the same intentions. Sometimes there could be people who come in with the wrong intentions. So we need to screen them properly. We have to make them go through a proper application process, have an interview, if possible. So it's about identifying that person's capabilities and identifying whether that person would fit into the system and be able to help the palliative care team that we're talking about. And of course, all these people should be properly supervised and evaluated periodically. Now, these are things which are required. It depends on your time availability and the situation that you're in. Sometimes some of these steps, like for example, you ask someone to have put in a formal application, it may not happen. So you need to be practical. Sometimes you may need to compromise at some stages. So of course, that is something we need to consider. So the biggest challenges I would see is to identify what makes a person do it and what they're looking forward to by being involved in this team. Now, once we are able to identify that, the the other challenge is, what can we offer them and how do we keep them happy and contributing. Now, um, once we are able to identify what makes them do it, it would be much easier for us to also understand what we need to do to keep them happy and contributing. So these are things which you need to figure out. It can vary from place to place, location to location, country to country, but then these are general principles that we need to keep in mind. And we should understand one basic thing here. As far as a volunteer is concerned, he or she is not being paid for those services. So therein lies the challenge. We can't tell someone, okay, if you are contributing this much of time, I will pay you this much money. In fact, it could work the other way around also. I mean, a person, a volunteer could actually lose interest if we offer them money, and he may not come back again. So we need to be very careful. It is not about money. That is not the idea here. That's not the idea, at least that person has in mind when he comes forward as a volunteer. So, so that is the advantage, and therein lies the challenge as well. To make them, to keep them happy and contributing, we need to make sure that they get something else, which is essentially which satisfies their needs. So like I said, it depends from place to place. It depends on the individuals. We need to be clear about it. So coming on to the next section, collaboration. Now, again, if you look at the definition in a dictionary, it's very simple. You would find that it is working together to achieve a well-defined common purpose or a common goal, as we see. But then why do you need to collaborate? So, in a developing country, like we discussed, we have a lot of other challenges which normally a developed country would not even consider as challenges. It's already taken care of. Like most developed countries would have something called what you call social security system in place. So if your health is not good, you have free health care, um, basic education, your children's basic education is taken care of, even housing for that matter, food, etc. But in countries like ours, even trying to find 2 square meals a day could be a challenging task. So, and obviously, all this contributes to the health, and it is part of healthcare, right? So we need to look at ways and means of working with other entities and working together to make sure that we provide what is important for the patient and the family. In isolation, we may not be able to do or deliver what is required for the patient and family. Like, for example, we often see kids, they tend to stop going to school, or the education is stopped when their parents are seriously ill. Now, what does that mean? The next generation is affected. Now, if you ask a hospital to take care of the kids' education, that is not going to be possible. It's not practical. Would the government take care of it? The government should. But can the government do it? No, it has its own limitations. Now, what if we work with an NGO? Another NGO, when I say NGO, it's a non-government organization or not for profit, which is focused on children's education. We engage with them, bring them on board. discuss with them the challenge being faced by this family. And I'm sure most often than not, these kind of organizations would be happy to take over such responsibility. So by working with other NGOs, by working with other entities, we could actually, give a comprehensive uh, palliative care as we imagine it. So it was about engaging with the government. Sometimes it could be engaging with medical institutions, the private and public sector, and other NGOs. Now, what does that mean? So when you work, when you collaborate, you get to merge your ideas or expertise. And what does that deliver? It increases your productivity. It leads to innovative solutions, and it can transform the society. And the changing scenario is also something which we need. Of course, in India, I'm not talking about the rest of the other countries where I'm not familiar with. But at least here now there are a lot more non-government organizations, and the CBOs means community-based organizations which are into palliative care. So it's also part of the public healthcare system, at least in certain states where there is a state level policy in place. There are the primary health centers and the community health centers where palliative care is being provided, at least to some extent. And there are some private hospitals, if not all, which offer paid palliative care services. Now, compared to what was happening a few years back, maybe 10 years back, there are a lot more people who are involved in palliative care right now. And that means that we need to work with all these entities to ensure that we get the best services to the common man, to the end consumer or the user. So if you work in a collaborative manner, we can always increase the quality and coverage of the care. Like for example, in our case, if we start providing care directly to the patients around us, we have our own limitations. Like Pallium India probably can cater to a few hundred or maybe even a few thousand patients at a time. But then if you look at the overall need, you will not be able to satisfy the need. So what do? We work with other entities. Each link center is actually a link for Pallium India. Like it could be a hospital, it could be another NGO, it could be another CBO, a community-based organization where through which we try to provide the services in collaboration with them. So what does that mean? The responsibility is also shared. And what is the advantage? You're able to reach out to a lot many more people, and your quality also obviously goes up because the responsibility is also shared. I'll just take you through another example of a lady. Sitha is a palliative care patient. She's paralyzed. She had some surgery on her spinal cord, and then she was wheelchair bound for the rest of her life. Today, she makes jewelry and sells online through Facebook and other media. And she's the only earning member of the family. She has her parents with her, staying with her, and she takes care of them as well. Now, how is this possible? A lot of people actually got involved. Like initially, we offered the initial, what you call the palliative care services. She had a lot of pain-related issues which were addressed. Then physiotherapy was required. That was also done. And then came the next stage where, what is the way forward? How do you restore the dignity of the patient, which we talk about often, right? It's always about the dignity of the patient and the family. Now, so then someone comes forward and offers to train her in jewelry making. Now, you get all these kits which could be used to make jewelry at home. So she started learning to do that. And then she became an expert. But then we have the next challenge there. How do we convert it into money? Because unless it is converted into money, it's not going to be of much help, right? So you need to sell it. How do you expect a person on a wheelchair to go around and sell what he or she makes? Again, you need external help. So then someone came up with an idea of selling this online. The idea was good. The problem was that she was not trained in using computers. So then another volunteer steps in and says, okay, I can teach her how to use a computer. So she learns how to use the computer. Now comes the next challenge. She doesn't have a computer. And we actually put an advertisement online in our website, in our social media. We said, okay, there is this person who wants to use the computers for earning a livelihood, and we require people to come in and maybe donate a laptop or pull in the money and make sure that she has access to a laptop or a computer. And someone did come forward and donated a computer, which made things easier. Now she didn't have connectivity at home. So then the local, the service provider, they came forward. They said, okay, we'll provide an internet connection. And that solved the problem there. She didn't have a road which could be used to reach her house. So the local panchayat stepped in. They did what was necessary so that at least the road was motorable, the path was motorable, so that a car or a vehicle could actually reach a home. The neighbors got involved and converted her house into a wheelchair-friendly house. At least the essential, the most essential rooms were converted. Now, why am I saying all this? Now, all this helped Sitha overcome her challenges as a disabled person, as we call it, or a physically challenged person, and then regain her dignity. Now, the local NGO helped, the neighborhood helped, the local panchayat or the local self-government institution helped. There are individuals who stepped in. So if the community comes together and takes up such responsibilities, this is what happens to people like Sitha. We can change their lives. And what does that mean? We are making sure that more people are productive, they are able to integrate with the society and contribute better. Now, like I said, all this was made possible through collaboration between government, organizations, NGOs, individuals, all of them. But then there are challenges to this. Now, if you say that, okay, you're fighting for a common cause, and so everyone should come together, and self-interest is not something to be considered, or selfishness. You don't do anything for yourself, it is for this common cause. Now that is in theory it is fine, but it's not practical, because we all are human beings, right? And we have our own needs, our own we come as a package. We come as a package, we have our own egos, we have our own selfish needs, jealousy, all sorts of things. So when organizations or individuals try to work together, we should understand that, again, these are human beings whom we are dealing with, and it's not the ideal situation what you're looking for. So we need to understand that self-interest will not just disappear. We need to work with them. Again, a leaderless movement. Okay, 10 people coming together is fine, But then if you want to deliver some result, you need a leader. Now, who is a leader? Like we talked about K.N.Nair, who ultimately became a leader. Now, if we wait for the leader to come forward, a K.N.Nair to come forward, it is never going to happen. We have to realize that it starts with me. I am the person who can start the process. We cannot just wait for that leader to come forward and then make all these things happen. So what should I do? It starts with the process of inquiry. We learn all about palliative care. That's fine. We understand what it is, what it means to deliver effective palliative care to patients. And then we have to go on a process, inquiry process, go deep within and try to understand what is it that, or why is it that I need to do this? What are the compelling reasons? What is it that I'm going to get out of this? The why and the what and the how, all those things, once they become clear, the challenges as we see it, we will be able to come up with innovative solutions for these challenges. Now, I can quote 100 examples of innovations that have happened in the palliative care field over the few years, including home care. The concept of home-based care, where you reach out to the patients, especially those who cannot come to a hospital. Now, all this was started just because someone or a team of individuals sat together and tried to find ways and means of achieving the care what they wanted to provide, working within the limitations of the society and the community. So innovation has a role to play here. Once you come up with an innovation, it actually inspires a lot of people around you. And once you start inspiring people, the people like K.N.Nairs, they start to make a huge impact. Now, what is the kind of impact? It's almost like a ripple effect. The individual affects the community, impacts the work that the individual does. It actually goes even beyond the community. It influences the society. It changes everything. It changes the future. Now, where does it all start? It starts with me. So what is the key to good collaborative working? So it's about understanding what each of the other partners require, and also be clear about what the common goal is in front of us. Now, how do you understand what each of the other partners need? It's very simple. This is what you have been trained to do, or rather, in your palliative care training program, I'm sure you have been taught to do this. Listen. And they will be able to tell you what they want. We'll just touch upon advocacy and a bit of fundraising also. We have 5 more minutes, I guess. So what does it mean, advocacy? Essentially, playing the role of an advocate. In our case, it is palliative care, and we all need to be advocates of palliative care. So why do we need it? Because this is a topic which is not often discussed. Not many people are familiar with what palliative care is all about. What is a kind of, people understand healthcare. But then the moment you say palliative care, a lot of misconceptions which come up, Like for example, some people feel that it is, so when healthcare ends or at the end of healthcare, palliative care begins. It's more or less like, end of life care. which is wrong. We realize now that it is wrong. But then more and more people should be made aware of these things. Sometimes you may, when you go to a hospital and the doctor says, the pain is because of the cancer, so we focus on the cancer and make sure that, that is taken care of, then the pain automatically will be solved. So we end up with an imagination that pain is not something which can be directly dealt with, cannot be treated, cannot be solved. Now, the community has to be made aware that these are things that could be done. There are effective ways of handling these situations. So, the focus areas, of course, I'm just trying to highlight each and every one around us is a target. Everyone needs to be made aware. So, advocacy has to focus on everyone around us. But then, if you look at it more closely, if you try to focus on specific um, groups, I would say the government, local government bodies, the media, which I would include the social media as well into that, because the kind of impact that the media has on shaping the future, the minds of the people, it is tremendous. Of course, the government officials, we need to work with them. We need to make them understand the need, work with clubs and associations. They should be made aware. Residents associations, schools, colleges. I cannot again emphasize enough the need of focusing on students, the younger generation, because they are the people who understand these things much better than us, the older generation. Because as you know, when we grow old, it's difficult for us to learn new things. So, but then the youngsters, they will be able to absorb these concepts much better. So what are the advantages? I'm not going deep into the what are the activities related to advocacy. Maybe you could explore further, but then it helps change the attitude of the public. It changes their behavior. It could influence policy makers, so that new policies may come in. It can reform institutions. Um, and of course, the work that we do, it has got a much broader, bigger impact. It creates that impact. And all this also helps in fundraising. How? It's very simple. If you go and ask someone for money and you tell him or her that it's for a kid's education, to buy books for a kid, I'm sure it will be much easier for you to raise that money than when you go to someone and say, I need money to take care of someone who is 70 years old and who needs some medicines to take care of his pain. Now, there is this misconception that, um, anyway, people in the 70s are going to die. What more can be done? Let us focus on the youngsters, because we understand their needs better. It's the future. It will have a bigger impact. So these are the problems that we face when the community is not aware of the need for palliative care, how it affects the society, the impact on the economy and all those things. So once that happens, the awareness is there, it definitely helps raise funds. Like someone earlier mentioned, the financial side of things, there are solutions for that. So you look at fundraising again, um, a few basic things that we need to be aware of. People give to people. People are not comfortable donating money to organizations. If India goes around and says, okay, we need money for our activities, nobody is going to give. But if India goes and talks to someone, shows or narrates the story of a Sitha, who we talked about, the need of a laptop, the need for physiotherapy for that individual, the need for the social support for that family, people automatically tend to connect with that. And once they realize the need, they are very happy to come forward and support such initiatives. So let us remember that people are happy to give or donate to people, not to organizations or their mission statements, etc. And fundraising is not about money. The money is just a means to an end. You need the money to solve some problem. So if you are able to, put the problem forward, and if someone is willing to solve that problem for us, actually we may not necessarily need the money. For example, if it is medicines that you require, which should cost probably a few thousand rupees. Now, if you are able to identify someone who can donate those medicines, for example, maybe a local medical shop who is willing to donate these medicines as per our requirement, we don't actually need his or her money, right? The money is there to solve a problem, and as long as the problem is taken care of and the solution is found, we don't actually need money. And it's not about selling anything. It is totally different from selling. And this is a common mistake that we see happening, in fundraising. We tend to go around and then try to sell. It is almost, the approach is almost like selling a product or a service to someone. You can never sell these concepts. It is about putting the need in front. You be with the donor and try to see the problem together. For example, if it is Sitha in front of you who has got the problem, I would rather sit with the donor and look at that problem as a common problem and try to find solutions to address that problem. And automatically, the donor will be happy to support. So it's all about appealing to emotions. And once you are able to open their hearts and minds, their wallets will automatically open. So it's always about inspiring people to give. It's not about selling a concept to them. And again, successful fundraising always involves storytelling. And we are all trained to do that, right? Right from our childhood days, we have all enjoyed listening to stories, and we all enjoy telling stories also. Now, we just need to sharpen those skills, and that is one of the major, the most effective weapons, if I may use that word, if you're looking at raising funds. And like we discussed earlier, we are on the same side. The donor and us, we are on the same side, and we are trying to address a common problem. So we share the problems as well as the successes. We share the goals. It's always about a shared engagement. And of course, goes without special mention, you need to be a good listener, because again, the donor will tell you what he wants to give or how he wants to contribute. It's only about being a good listener to the donor, because he or she will also have his own reasons for contributing, for being part of your initiative. There are other opportunities which require special skills, like for example, government grants. If you want to access those grants, you need a different skill set, like project writing, budgeting, presentation, all those things. If you're designing campaigns, like for example, a campaign like ice bucket challenge, it requires a different skill set. So these are possibilities where I believe it is better if we work with other groups, other individuals who bring those skill sets. Of course, if we have those skill sets with us, definitely worth exploring. But if not, we could always work with others to look at these kind of fundraising opportunities. So, yeah. I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Binod. So this is the this is not a usual topic that we usually used to do. So I encourage you to ask questions.
Sorry, say that again, Sunil. I missed you.
No, I was asking them to ask if they have any doubts,
Yeah,
because
sure.
this is not a topic which is usually handled by
Yeah,
medical professionals. So
right, right.
okay, so there is a question. So
As it,
what
window.
kind of, yeah, Dr. Geethiga, what kind of basic research work is needed to start a standalone for a region?
Yes, good question. Thank you, Geetika. Um, so, of course, if we are looking at delivering palliative care, I would imagine the first thing to do, if you are looking at research, is to understand the need in the community. When I say the need, probably we need to understand the number of patients in a particular locality who require these kind of services. um, we need to, if we can get those kind of inputs from the government, that is well and good. If not, there would be, we need to work with some other entity to try and understand the number of patients, what kind of patients we have, like if we need to classify them into bedbound, people, with pain care needs, the what do you call cancer patients, those kind of things. So I think the basic research should start there, um, the need in the society, and then from there starts, once the need is established, we always look at the possible solutions, what we can offer or how to address those needs. So I believe that is the first and foremost as far as research work is concerned. How do you keep volunteers motivated? Can you give some specific examples of how you keep? Okay, so let us go back to Mr. Nair. Now, he comes to us um, with a open heart. He says, "I would like to work with you." Now, he's not clear how he can work with us, what he can contribute. But then, once we spend time with him, he says, okay, now over the last few years, I have gone through all the texts related to oncology. I know what has gone wrong in my wife's case, where the what you call diagnosis went wrong, and what are the emotional things that you go through as a patient, as a caregiver. So he comes forward and says, I can help people in those areas. Now, what does that mean? He's not saying that, okay, I can help you raise funds, right? Now, when you understand that, okay, this is a person who has gone through this experience and wants to use this experience to directly help someone in that situation, we have to make sure that he is engaged in that manner. Now, if you put him in charge of accounts and ask him to do the day book, the cash book, he may do it for a few days, for a few months, but then I'm not sure whether he would be motivated enough to continue with that work. But at the same time, there is this, imagine you have a retired bank official who comes, or a bank manager maybe, who comes forward and says, yes, my mother went through this phase. She was bedridden for a while. Now she is no more. I would like to contribute sometime. I understand the need and the relevance of what you're doing. Now, can I work with you? And he's very clear that, okay, what he brings to the table is his accounting knowledge. Now we could get him do that kind of work which he feels um, comfortable doing, plus he feels if he's able to take it to the next level, fine tune the accounting systems, make sure that you are able to bring in more funds, maybe that is what would give him more happiness. So it is about identifying what is it that that person is interested in, what is it that he can bring to the table, one, plus what is it that he would be passionate about, and that is where I believe the motivation would come from. Gitika and Nilima, did I answer your questions? Thank you, Gitika.
Any more questions? Yes, Dr. Geetika, you can unmute and ask.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes,
Hello.
please ask.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask that when we talk about funds, so if we are able to manage any somehow, so is documentation the only thing that is needed to maintain the transparency and clarity, or is there anything else that should be taken into account?
Thanks, Gitika. So, no, it's not the only thing that is required. For depends on what kind of organization you are setting up. For example, if it is a charitable trust that you want to set up, or it's a charitable organization, there are things like what do you call the income tax. I think it's ATG exemptions that you get. So you could have a registration done there. You could get their certificate, which will also help your donors to support you better. Now, when you do that, again, you need to be filing these returns regularly to the income tax officials. Now there has been a lot of talk about FCRA. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that FCRA. Now that is a big discussion doing the rounds, right, in the news. So FCRA stands for Foreign Contribution Regulations Act. So what does that mean? So if you are getting funds from outside the country, there are a whole lot of other what you call restrictions, and of course you need to get an approval from the central government, the Home Ministry, to access those funds. And we need to also keep them informed of how we are using that money and what percentage is being used for direct service delivery, what is being used for management or administrative costs. So those kind of things. So to answer your question, it is not just about keeping the books of accounts, but I think that would be one major component, because unless the books of accounts are properly maintained on a day-to-day basis, it is going to be difficult when people come and ask you the questions, difficult questions, and you can expect that anytime. Someone from the department will come forward and then ask you for all kinds of details, and you should be ready with that. So yeah, certifications if required, accounts, proper accounts, and definitely a separate bank account to deal with all these kind of funds. It should never be mixed up with your personal funds, etc. Savitri says, sir, in communities where basic MCH and infectious disease burden is not addressed, how much of the scarce health resources allocate to palliative care? Good question, Savitri. So let me ask you another question connected to this. Do you think in the times of COVID, which is an infectious disease, is there any relevance of palliative care? Savitri, you can unmute your microphone and respond if you feel so.
Sir, sir, the question was not audible. Could you repeat?
So the question was, you're talking about infectious disease burden. So if there is so much of disease burden, infectious disease burden in a country or in a healthcare setting, um, do you think there is this kind of resources should be allocated for palliative care, or where there is a possibility? My question was, I'll take an example of COVID-19. It's an infectious disease. It's a huge burden. Now, in such a situation, what do you think is the relevance of palliative care? Or is there a relevance for palliative care at all in a situation like this?
In COVID-19, yes, sir, it has been adequately demonstrated that there is a huge requirement for palliative care in the COVID-19 setting. But the infections that I was talking about were more like, say, malaria, strep typhus, leptospirosis, meningitis,
Okay,
these kind of illnesses which have a short course and they claim lives very quickly if left untreated or if it gets complicated.
correct. So again, let us look at the different situation. It's malaria. Imagine a, a young lady coming to you with a kid who is identified with malaria. What would she be going through? And imagine that lady is a single mother, I mean, single parent, doesn't have a husband, and you know, has a what you call hand to mouth existence. Now, she brings a kid to the hospital, her kid to the hospital, and it has been diagnosed as malaria, and you need to be treated. Maybe a hospital admission is required. Do you think there is any relevance for palliative care there?
Yes, in terms of communication with the family and basically even if the child passes away or something, then they will also require grief management. And
Even prior to that, even identifying this as malaria, how many people know how serious it is, whether it is totally curable or not? The moment, imagine she's an only parent, and you have this probably this only kid who she's living for. It's her entire life is around that kid. Now, how it is communicated to that person, that mother, is as important as what medicines you give them, right? That is one. Second is, give the medicines, what about their food? What if that person is not able to find, or rather afford to have food for the kid and the mother? Don't you think we need to address that? Where does that fall under? I mean, all these things should fall under palliative care. So the way we look at it, if we slightly change it, in 2014, the World Health Assembly came out with a very interesting report. What it said was, the principles of palliative care is integrated into healthcare by all the member states across the world. Now, I believe that is the core, focus. It's not about palliative care as a special department which deals with terminally ill or end of life situations. If you consider the principles of palliative care, where you have an equal emphasis on psychological, social, and spiritual aspects, that is integrated into your normal healthcare delivery, the effectiveness is much, much more. The patients and the family members will go back with much bigger satisfaction. And if we are able to allocate the right kind of resources for that, it will not cost much, in fact, but it's about providing that kind of what we call total care, as we call it. That will give a different experience. That is something which the world is now focused on.
yes, sir. Actually, right from the beginning of this course, I just passed out of MBBS. The one thing that has been coming in my mind is most of what we're talking about here is comes under the definition of health that we talk about. And
Yes,
as doctors, if my duty is to ensure health of the patient, then all of this becomes my duty, even if palliative care is not a separate specialty and I'm not trained in it. And it also
absolutely.
requires for me to go out of my conventional role as a doctor and engage more with the patient and their surroundings. So it has actually surprised me that we need a separate specialty and a separate course to talk about these things, whereas this should
Right.
be a mainstream thing.
Right. You're absolutely right. I think palliative care as a specialty should die. It should die. I don't
I
know,
agree.
maybe in the next 50 years or 100 years. And, the principles it integrated into each one of us, that is good enough. And we shouldn't be discussing about palliative care. We should be just discussing about healthcare. Thank you for that question, and thanking you, and again, bringing out, that concept. I totally agree with you.
Thank you, sir.
So I think we can wind up the session. So essential message is to integrate palliative care into the health system so that we doesn't require much specialist palliative care services, but still we may need somebody to train and to look after patients with more severe distress. So, so this is like medicine, respiratory medicine, neurology, etc. So uh, the basics of palliative care should be practiced by everybody in the health system. Uh, so that is integration of palliative care into primary healthcare system or healthcare workers is one of the vision of Palliative India also. Uh, so thank you, Binod, for being with us and for having a wonderful session. Thank you all for your active participation. Thank you all.
And thank you.